A small, battered pickup truck navigates through a violent Montana snowstorm. Inside, single father Ethan Mitchell glances worriedly at his sleeping 8-year-old daughter, Emma, in the passenger seat. Through the blinding snow, his headlights suddenly catch a flash of metal, off-road wreckage. Pulling over, despite the danger, he discovers an injured woman in a torn flight suit, barely conscious. "Please, don't call anyone," she whispers, her eyes reflecting both fear and determination. Ethan hesitates, then makes a decision that would forever alter 3 lives. No one could have imagined that this broken pilot would heal the broken pieces of a family she never knew she needed. One man who lost his faith in love after tragedy. One woman who conquered the skies but remained earthbound by her secrets. What happens when a storm brings together 2 souls separated by different worlds but united by the same emptiness? Watch until the end to discover what truly matters beyond status, money, and the expectations that chain us. The Montana winter sunrise crept reluctantly over the hills outside Bozeman, casting long shadows across Ethan Mitchell's modest home. At 34, his face already carried the weathered lines of someone much older, etched by grief and responsibility rather than just time. The alarm hadn't gone off yet, but Ethan was already awake, staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing for another day of being everything for someone else. He moved quietly through the pre-dawn darkness, a routine perfected over 3 years since his wife's passing. The coffee maker gurgled softly as he prepared Emma's lunch, adding a small, handwritten note as he did every day. "You're braver than you believe," he wrote in careful letters, tucking it beside the sandwich cut precisely into stars using the cookie cutter his daughter insisted made food taste better. The workshop attached to his house waited silently, half-finished furniture projects catching the first streams of morning light. His hands, strong and calloused, ran over the smooth curve of a rocking chair he'd been working on for weeks. Custom pieces like this one paid the bills, barely. His craftsmanship was sought after by those who could afford it, which was rarely people from his own community. "Dad," Emma's voice, still thick with sleep, pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her mother's too large knitted hat already pulled over her tangled blonde hair. She wore it everywhere, even indoors, as if it were a talisman against forgetting. "Hey, Stargazer." The nickname emerged with his smile, one of the few that reached his eyes these days. "You're up early. Jupiter was really bright last night. I added it to my sky journal." She clutched the worn notebook to her chest, pages filled with careful drawings of constellations and planets, each meticulously labeled in a child's determined handwriting. Ethan nodded, wondering, not for the first time, if her obsession with the stars was her way of feeling closer to her mother. Sarah had been the one to name the constellations for her, to explain that the light they were seeing had traveled years to reach them. "Some things are worth waiting for," she'd told Emma. Ethan still couldn't decide if that was true. Their morning unfolded with the comfortable rhythm of long practice. Emma setting the table while Ethan scrambled eggs. The quiet conversation about school projects. The gentle reminder about boots and gloves, as the Montana winter showed no signs of softening its grip on the land. As they drove to school in his father's old pickup, a vehicle he kept running through sheer stubbornness and an intimate knowledge of its aging parts, Ethan watched Emma in quick glances. She was growing to look more like Sarah every day, with the same thoughtful expression when she concentrated, the same slight furrow between her eyebrows when she was worried, but trying not to show it. "Mrs. Peterson said we need to bring pictures of our family for the heritage wall," Emma said, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. The familiar ache settled in Ethan's chest. "We have plenty of photos at home," he said, keeping his voice steady. "We'll find some good ones tonight." She nodded but didn't look at him. They both knew what she meant. Pictures of a complete family, not the fractured version they'd become. At the school drop-off, Emma leaned across the seat for their daily hug, breathing in the scent of sawdust and coffee that clung to him. "Love you to Jupiter and back," she whispered, their private version of the traditional saying. "Love you beyond the galaxy," he replied, watching until she disappeared through the school doors before pulling away. The workshop welcomed him with its familiar scents and sounds. Here, among the tools his father had taught him to use, Ethan found whatever piece was available to him. Wood didn't ask questions. It didn't need emotional reassurance. It simply responded to patient, skilled hands, revealing the beauty hidden within. Today he was finishing a dining table for a family in Bozeman's wealthier district. The irony wasn't lost on him. Crafting a gathering place for a family while his own table often felt too large for just two. His hands moved automatically, sanding in long, even strokes, mind drifting to the mortgage payment due next week, and the truck's increasingly concerning transmission sounds. His phone buzzed with a text from Mike at the hardware store. "Got those special hinges you ordered? Also Eleanor asking if you'll fix her cabinet again. Told her you would. Sorry, not sorry." Ethan smiled despite himself. The town had its own way of taking care of him, disguising charity as favors needed. Eleanor, a 70-year-old widow, had perfectly functioning cabinets, but always managed to break something when she knew money was tight for him. She'd pay him with too much cash and a casserole that would feed him and Emma for days. The hours passed in the familiar rhythm of work. By afternoon, he was loading the finished table into his truck for delivery when the sky began darkening ominously. The forecast had mentioned snow, but this looked more serious. Heavy clouds settling low over the mountains with a weight that promised something substantial. "Looks like we're in for a big one," said Dan from the gas station as Ethan filled the truck. "They're saying possible whiteout conditions by tonight. Better get that delivery done quick." Ethan glanced at his watch. Still time to deliver the table and pick up Emma before the worst hit. He'd driven in Montana snowstorms his entire life. It was just another part of existing in this beautiful, harsh landscape. After the delivery, which included the usual awkward moment of standing in his worn work clothes in an immaculate home while accepting payment, Ethan headed to the school. The snow had started, fat flakes swirling in increasingly urgent patterns. By the time Emma climbed into the truck, the wind was driving the snow horizontally across the road. "Dad, can we still go to the library?" Emma asked, her face hopeful. "I need books on constellations for my science project." Ethan looked at the darkening sky, torn between disappointment and practical sense. "Not today, Em. This storm's coming in faster than expected. We need to get home." Her small shoulders slumped, but she didn't argue. Emma had grown old in ways no 8-year-old should, understanding too early that life often adjusted your plans without consultation. "We'll go this weekend," he promised, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "First thing Saturday." The drive home took twice as long as usual, the windshield wipers struggling against the onslaught of snow. Emma had fallen asleep, lulled by the truck's heater and the rhythm of the storm. Ethan kept both hands tight on the wheel, squinting to make out the road ahead. They were still 20 minutes from home, on the rural stretch of highway that wound through the foothills, when his headlights caught something through the curtain of white. A metallic glint off to the side of the road where there should have been nothing but trees and underbrush. Ethan slowed, peering through the passenger window. There it was again, something reflective, partially buried in fresh snow. He hesitated, glancing at his sleeping daughter, then at the storm that was rapidly intensifying. The responsible thing would be to keep driving, get Emma home safely. But something, intuition, or simply the deeply ingrained rural ethic of helping others, made him pull over, emergency lights blinking weakly against the white backdrop. "Emma, honey," he said gently. "I need to check something outside. Stay here, okay?" She nodded sleepily as he tucked his coat more securely around her. "I'll be right back." The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped from the truck, snow immediately working its way into his collar and soaking through his jeans. He trudged toward what he now could see was some kind of wreckage partially obscured by snow. Metal, and what looked like pieces of a small aircraft. His heart rate quickened as he approached, scanning for signs of life. That's when he saw her, a woman half buried in snow, wearing what appeared to be a flight suit torn at the shoulder. Blood had frozen along her temple, her breathing creating small, irregular clouds in the frigid air. "Hey, can you hear me?" Ethan knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, disoriented at first, then focusing on him with surprising intensity. "Please," she whispered, her voice strained. "Don't call anyone. No authorities." Her gloved hand gripped his wrist with unexpected strength. You're injured. You need a hospital, Ethan argued, already reaching for his phone. No, she insisted, struggling to sit up. I can't be found. Not yet. Her eyes held a desperate plea that stopped him short. Just help me get somewhere warm, please. Ethan hesitated, every instinct telling him to call for help. But something in her expression, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, made him pause. I have my daughter with me. I won't be any trouble, she promised, wincing as she tried to stand. Just until the storm passes. In that moment, as the snow swirled around them like a living thing, Ethan made a choice that went against his better judgment, but somehow felt right in a way he couldn't explain. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they struggled back to the truck. Emma was wide awake now, her eyes huge as Ethan helped the stranger into the back seat. Dad? She had an accident, Ethan explained, keeping his voice calm. We're going to help her get warm, okay? Emma nodded solemnly, watching as the woman settled painfully into the seat. I'm Emma, she offered, turning fully to face their unexpected passenger. The woman's face softened, pain momentarily eclipsed by something gentler. I'm Alex, she replied, her voice steadier now. Thank you for stopping. Her eyes met Ethan's in the rearview mirror, carrying the weight of secrets he couldn't begin to guess. As they continued their journey through the worsening storm, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed an invisible threshold. The truck pushed forward through the blinding snow, carrying them all towards something none of them could yet see. Behind the controls of a small Cessna aircraft, Alexandra Reynolds, Alex, to the few people who actually knew her rather than her reputation, struggled to maintain altitude as the Montana storm system engulfed her. Warning lights flickered across the instrument panel, and the plane shuddered violently against winds it wasn't designed to battle. 3 hours earlier, she'd been in a sterile boardroom in Seattle, surrounded by executives in suits who looked at her with a mixture of respect and suspicion. The company position is clear, the lead counsel had stated flatly. The test flight parameters were compromised due to pilot error. That's a lie, Alex had responded, her voice deadly calm despite the rage simmering beneath. The stabilizer malfunctioned. I documented it in my pre-flight check and was told it had been addressed. The logs show no such documentation, Ms. Reynolds. She'd stared at them then, these men who had never put their lives on the line in an experimental aircraft, who had never felt the exhilaration and terror of pushing the boundaries of what humans could make machines do. They expected her to play along, to accept blame for their engineering failures, because her family name and reputation could weather it, because she was the perfect scapegoat, privileged, famous, seemingly untouchable. So she'd walked out, taken her grandfather's small plane from the private hangar without filing a flight plan, needing to clear her head before meeting with the one board member who might actually believe her side of the story. She'd flown countless times in conditions worse than the forecast had predicted. But forecasts could be wrong, and the storm had intensified with alarming speed. Now fighting for control as the small aircraft bucked and dived, Alex felt the familiar calm of crisis settle over her. Her body went into the automatic responses drilled into her since her first flight at 16. Adjust trim, reduce power, maintain heading. But the right wing dipped suddenly, unresponsive to correction, and she knew with the clarity of experience that she was going down. The ground came up faster than expected, a painful meeting of metal and earth that threw her against the restraints. Her head struck the side window with enough force to crack the glass, and then there was nothing but disorienting darkness. She wasn't sure how long she'd been unconscious when awareness returned, bringing with it stabbing pain and bitter cold. The cockpit had partially crumpled, snow already accumulating through the shattered windshield. Moving caused electric jolts of pain through her ankle and ribs. But the aviation instructor's voice from her past echoed clearly. If you can move at all after a crash, get out. Fire and fuel are not patient enemies. Using every ounce of training and determination, Alex extracted herself from the wreckage, falling into snow that immediately began soaking through her flight suit. The cold was almost a relief against what felt like fire in her ankle. Concussion, probably, sprained or broken ankle, bruised or cracked ribs. Survivable injuries, but problematic given the circumstances. She needed to think clearly. The storm was worsening. No flight plan meant no immediate search. The remote location and weather meant low chances of being spotted. Her phone had died hours ago. The plane's emergency beacon might have been triggered in the crash, but with the storm, rescue efforts would be delayed even if they knew exactly where to look. Alex had almost resigned herself to a night huddled in what remained of the aircraft when headlights cut through the swirling white darkness. A vehicle had stopped on the nearby road, a stroke of luck she hadn't dared hope for. Then hands were brushing snow from her face, and she found herself looking up at a man with concerned eyes and a steady presence. Her first instinct was caution. If word got out about her crash before she could speak to her ally on the board, the company would control the narrative completely. She'd be the reckless heiress who took a joyride in dangerous conditions, her credibility regarding the test flight destroyed. "Don't call anyone," she'd managed to say, reading the intention in his expression. His reluctance was clear, and then he'd mentioned his daughter. A complication, but also leverage of sorts. Surely a father would understand the need for discretion, for space to sort things out away from public scrutiny. Now, sitting in the backseat of his truck, Alex studied the man through pain-blurred vision. He wasn't what she'd expected in a rescuer, not the typical rugged Montana rancher type, but something gentler. His hands on the steering wheel were strong but refined, with the distinctive calluses of someone who worked with precision tools. His shoulders carried tension that seemed habitual rather than situational, and his eyes in the rear-view mirror revealed a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The little girl, Emma, kept glancing back at her with undisguised curiosity. Unlike her father, there was no reservation in her gaze, just open interest, and something that looked surprisingly like recognition, as though Alex were a character from a book Emma had been reading about. "Are you a real pilot?" Emma asked suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled in the truck. Alex managed a small smile despite the throbbing in her head. "Yes, I am." "Like Amelia Earhart?" "Not quite as famous," Alex replied, catching the father's quick glance in the mirror. "My mom said, 'Girls can fly anything boys can fly,'" Emma continued. "She wanted to take flying lessons but never got to." Something flickered across the man's face, a brief spasm of grief so raw that Alex had to look away. The air in the truck suddenly felt heavy with unspoken history. "I'm Ethan," he said after a moment, as if recognizing the need to shift focus. "Ethan Mitchell." "Alex," she replied, deliberately omitting her last name. If he recognized her, as the Reynolds aviation heiress, as the woman whose face had been splashed across magazines as the youngest test pilot to break the sound barrier in an experimental craft, he gave no indication. The truck slowed, turning onto a narrow driveway nearly hidden by snow. A modest single-story house emerged from the white landscape, warm lights glowing from windows framed by a large front porch. Next to it stood what appeared to be a workshop, larger than the house itself. "It's not much," Ethan said, sounding almost apologetic as he parked. "But it's warm, and the storm's not getting any better tonight." Alex thought of her sterile penthouse apartment in Seattle, with its award-winning design and utter lack of personality. "It looks perfect," she said honestly. Getting from the truck to the house proved challenging. Her ankle gave way completely when she tried to put weight on it, and she found herself being half carried by Ethan, while Emma ran ahead to open doors and turn on lights. The domesticity of it, a family returning home making accommodations for an unexpected guest, struck Alex with an almost physical ache of unfamiliarity. Inside, the house was exactly what the exterior had promised, modest but thoughtfully arranged, with furniture that looked handcrafted rather than store-bought. Photos lined the walls, most featuring Emma at various ages, and a woman with the same blonde hair and bright smile. Sarah, Alex would later learn, though neither Ethan nor Emma volunteered her name that first night. Ethan settled Alex on the couch, disappearing briefly, and returning with a first aid kit that looked more comprehensive than most home versions. "I work with tools," he explained, noting her surprise. "Knowing basic medical care comes with the territory." His hands were gentle as he checked her injuries, his movements suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with trauma. Emma hovered nearby, bringing a glass of water and extra pillows without being asked. "Your ankle's swollen pretty badly," Ethan said after a careful examination. "I don't think it's broken, but you shouldn't walk on it for a while. The cut on your head isn't as bad as it looked with all the blood, but you might have a concussion." Alex nodded, wincing as he wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency. "Thank you for everything. I know this is an imposition." "We help when we can," Ethan replied simply, and something about the way he said it suggested this was a fundamental truth in his world, not just empty words. "Dad makes the best hot chocolate when it snows," Emma announced, already heading for the kitchen. "With real chocolate, not powder." The domestic simplicity of the moment, a child making cocoa while a winter storm raged outside, felt surreal after the corporate warfare and literal crash Alex had experienced in the past 24 hours. She leaned back against the cushions, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. "You should rest," Ethan said, noticing her fatigue. "We can talk more tomorrow, figure out whatever needs figuring out." There was a question in his voice, an acknowledgement of all the things she hadn't explained. Why she'd been flying in a storm. Why she didn't want authorities called. Who she really was. "Tomorrow," Alex agreed, already feeling consciousness slipping away as the warmth of the house and the surprising sense of safety enveloped her. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was Emma carefully placing a crocheted blanket over her, tucking it around her shoulders with the solemn concentration of a child performing an important ritual. "Night, pilot lady," the girl whispered. "Thanks for not crashing into our house." In the kitchen doorway, Ethan watched, his expression unreadable as snow continued to fall outside, sealing them all together in this unexpected arrangement. The scent of coffee and something sweet baking pulled Alex from sleep the next morning. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was. Not her apartment, not a hotel room? Then pain reintroduced itself, a sharp reminder in her ankle and a duller ache in her ribs, and memory returned with it. The crash, the man and his daughter, the storm. Sunlight streamed through windows that framed a world transformed by snow. Pristine white drifts piled against the house and blanketing the landscape beyond. The storm had passed, but it had left its mark. Alex struggled to sit up, biting back a groan as her body protested the movement. "You're awake!" Emma's voice came from the doorway. She stood with a book clutched to her chest, already dressed for the day in jeans and a sweater, with planets scattered across it. "Dad said not to bother you, but I heard you moving." "You're not bothering me," Alex assured her, managing a smile despite the throbbing in her head. "What time is it?" "Almost 9. Dad called my school and said we couldn't make it because of the snow." Emma approached, her expression curious but cautious. "Does your head hurt really bad? You have a big bruise." Alex touched her temple gingerly. "I've had worse." "From other crashes?" Emma asked, eyes widening. "From testing aircraft that don't always behave the way they're supposed to," Alex clarified, then wondered if she'd said too much. The fewer details shared, the better. "Cool," Emma breathed, clearly impressed. She hesitated, then thrust forward the book she'd been holding. "I thought you might want to see this. It's about female pilots throughout history." Alex accepted the well-worn book, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. It looks fascinating." "Morning." Ethan's voice drew her attention to where he stood in the archway between the living room and kitchen, a mug in his hand. Like his daughter, he was fully dressed, though a light dusting of what looked like flour suggested he'd been the source of the baking smell. "Hope Emma didn't wake you?" "She didn't," Alex assured him, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "And I've imposed on your hospitality far too long already." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "The driveway has 2 feet of snow, the plows haven't made it to our road yet, and you can barely stand. I'd say you're stuck with us a little longer." He approached, offering the mug. "Coffee? I can add something stronger for the pain if you need it." The coffee was perfect, strong and hot, exactly what she needed. "This is fine, thank you, and I'm sorry about all of this." He shrugged, the gesture somehow both casual and guarded. "Like I said, we help when we can." His eyes studied her face with quiet assessment. "How's the head?" "Been better, been worse." It was the test pilot's standard response, a phrase that acknowledged pain without giving it power. He nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. "There's cinnamon rolls if you're hungry, and I found some clothes that might fit you better than what you slept in." Only then did Alex register that she was still wearing her torn, blood-stained flight suit. I'd appreciate that, and a shower if possible. First door on the left down the hall. I'll leave clothes outside the door. He turned to Emma. Why don't you help me finish breakfast while our guest gets cleaned up? Can I show her my sky journal later? Emma asked, already following her father toward the kitchen. If she's feeling up to it, Ethan replied, his voice fading as they disappeared from view. The bathroom was small but immaculately clean, with mismatched towels and a shower that took a minute to produce hot water. Alex stood under the spray longer than necessary, letting it wash away dried blood and the lingering sense of catastrophe. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, she found neatly folded clothes outside the door as promised. Soft flannel pajama pants, a faded university sweatshirt, thick socks. It wasn't until she dressed that Alex noticed the label sewn into the collar of the sweatshirt. Sarah. These weren't just any clothes. They had belonged to someone specific, someone important. The realization made her pause, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a more profound way than simply being an unexpected guest. When she made her way back to the kitchen, supported by the wall to keep weight off her injured ankle, Ethan was at the stove while Emma set the table. They moved around each other with the synchronized rhythm of a long-established routine, each knowing exactly where the other would be without looking. Emma spotted her first. You look better without all the blood, she observed matter-of-factly. Dad, Alex is up. Ethan turned, spatula in hand, and something flickered across his face when he saw her in the borrowed clothes. For a moment, pain shadowed his features, before he smoothed it away with practiced control. I can change if these aren't appropriate, Alex said quietly, understanding belatedly whose clothes she was wearing. No, they're fine, Ethan replied, his voice carefully neutral. They were just sitting in a drawer. Better than your torn flight suit. Emma seemed oblivious to the undercurrent, happily pulling out a chair at the table. You can sit by me. Dad made his special scrambled eggs with the secret ingredient. Don't oversell 'em, Ethan, Ethan cautioned, but there was fondness in his voice as he brought plates to the table. Breakfast unfolded with surprising ease, Emma carrying most of the conversation with questions about flying and whether Alex had ever seen a shooting star from the cockpit. Ethan spoke less but watched carefully, his attention divided between his daughter's animation and their guest's reaction. So, he said finally, as Emma cleared the dishes with the exaggerated carefulness of a child determined to prove her responsibility, you want to tell me what really happened yesterday, and why you're so keen to avoid authorities. Alex measured her response carefully. I was flying to meet someone important. The storm was worse than forecasted. There was a mechanical issue. All true, if incomplete. And the no authorities part? Ethan pressed, his expression suggesting he wasn't easily deflected. Alex sighed, deciding to offer at least a partial truth. I work in aviation. There are politics involved. If certain people find out about this crash before I can speak to the right people, it could damage my career irreparably. You're running from something, Ethan observed, not a question but a statement. Not running, regrouping. She met his gaze directly. I just need a day or two to make some calls, arrange transportation. Then I'll be out of your hair. He studied her for a long moment. Your phone survived the crash. No, she admitted. It's dead. You can use mine, he offered, sliding it across the table. I need to check on the workshop anyway. The storm might have damaged the roof. The gesture of trust, handing his phone to a virtual stranger, wasn't lost on Alex. Thank you. He nodded, standing to join Emma at the sink. Take your time. We'll be outside clearing snow if you need anything. After they left, Alex stared at the phone, weighing her options. She could call her contact on the board, try to explain the situation, but without evidence, without the flight logs that proved she'd documented the stabilizer issue, it would be her word against theirs. And now she'd added another complication, an unauthorized flight that ended in a crash she'd concealed. Instead, she pulled up a news site, scanning for any mention of her disappearance. Nothing yet, which meant she had a little time. Next, she checked weather reports. The storm had affected much of the region, which would delay any search efforts if they'd even been initiated. Through the kitchen window, she could see Ethan and Emma in the yard, working together to clear a path from the house to what must be his workshop. The little girl wielded a shovel almost as tall as herself, laughing as she tossed snow in high arcs that caught the morning sunlight. Ethan moved with the easy strength of someone accustomed to physical labor, occasionally pausing to help Emma with a particularly heavy drift. There was something mesmerizing about their interaction, the casual affection, the unspoken understanding between them. Alex found herself watching longer than she'd intended, struck by the simple beauty of their connection. Her own childhood had been marked by achievements rather than moments like these. Flight simulators instead of snow angels, press conferences instead of shared chores. A sharp pang of something that felt uncomfortably like longing made her look away. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. She was a temporary intruder in their lives, and the sooner she resolved her situation, the better for everyone. Yet as she placed Ethan's phone back on the table, unused, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that she'd glimpsed something rare and precious in that ordinary moment between father and daughter, something that all her accomplishments and accolades had never provided. The next few days unfolded in an unexpected rhythm that felt both strange and strangely comfortable. With the local roads still impassable due to the record snowfall, Alex found herself temporarily integrated into the Mitchell household's daily patterns. Ethan spent mornings in his workshop, crafting furniture with a skill that impressed even Alex's engineer's eye. She'd ventured out there on the second day, balancing carefully on a makeshift crutch he'd fashioned from an old broomstick, curious about the source of the beautiful pieces throughout the house. "You don't have to entertain me," she'd said, watching from the doorway as he worked on what appeared to be a rocking chair, his movements precise and confident. He'd glanced up, a light dusting of sawdust in his hair catching the winter sunlight. "I'm not much for entertainment," he'd replied, but gestured to a stool nearby. "But you're welcome to sit if you want." She'd expected awkward silence, but instead found herself drawn into conversation about the properties of different woods, the engineering principles behind joints and stresses. Her technical knowledge complemented his practical experience, and before long they were sketching modifications to a chair design he'd been struggling with. "You know a lot about structural integrity for a pilot," he observed, studying her suggestion for redistributing weight through the chair back. "Engineering degree before flight school," she explained, then caught herself. Too specific. But Ethan just nodded, seemingly uninterested in pursuing her background further. Afternoons belonged to Emma, who had appointed herself Alex's official entertainment committee. She brought books about constellations and famous aviators, chattering eagerly about her school science project on the solar system. "Dad tries to help," she confided, arranging colored pencils for a drawing of Jupiter, "but he doesn't know as much about space as Mom did." It was the first direct mention of her mother, and Alex treaded carefully. "She liked astronomy?" Emma nodded, concentration on her drawing not wavering. "She was a science teacher. She knew everything about stars. Dad says that's where she is now." The simple statement carried such weight that Alex felt momentarily breathless with the responsibility of responding appropriately. "That's a beautiful thought," she managed finally. "Do you believe in heaven?" Emma asked, looking up with the direct gaze of childhood. Alex had never been asked this question so plainly. In her world of test flights and corporate boardrooms, existential conversations weren't exactly common. "I believe in physics," she said slowly, "but I also believe there are things beyond what we can measure or understand." Emma seemed to consider this seriously. "Dad says he doesn't know for sure, but he hopes so. I think he really does believe, though. He talks to Mom sometimes when he thinks I'm asleep." The confidence crushed Alex's heart. This child sharing her father's private grief so innocently. "People we love stay with us in many ways," she offered gently. "Like Mom's hat," Emma agreed, touching the knitted hat she wore despite being indoors. "And her stars." In the evenings, they gathered in the living room, Emma often falling asleep against her father's side as he read aloud from her current favorite book. Alex would sit in the armchair across from them, ostensibly resting her ankle, but actually absorbing the peaceful domesticity of the scene with a mixture of appreciation and melancholy. On the third night, after Emma had been carried to bed, Ethan returned with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "Medicinal," he said with the ghost of a smile, pouring modest amounts into each glass. They drank in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the occasional pop from the fireplace and the wind outside. Eventually, Ethan spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Sarah, my wife died 3 years ago. Cancer." It was quick, which the doctor said was a blessing, but it didn't feel that way. Alex hadn't asked, hadn't pushed for this confidence. "I'm sorry," she said simply. He nodded, eyes on the amber liquid in his glass. "Me too. Every day." A pause, then, "The clothes you're wearing were hers. I should have said something the first day, but—" "I understand," Alex assured him. "Thank you for sharing them. I can imagine how difficult that must be." "It's strange," he continued, as if needing to explain something to himself as much as to her. "For a long time I couldn't bear the thought of anyone touching her things. Now, seeing someone else use them feels almost right. Like they're serving a purpose again instead of just waiting." The vulnerability in his admission created a space that seemed to demand equal honesty. Alex found herself speaking, without fully intending to. "My grandfather built planes," she said. "Small ones at first, then bigger. He taught me to fly when I was 16, against my parents' wishes. He said I had the Reynolds touch, whatever that means."